Muchísimas gracias. Yo estoy muy agradecido de haber sido invitado aquí por la IID y por Ideas y también por Beatriz. Estoy también muy agradecido, muy honrado de estar en el Museo de la Diáspora Cubana porque yo fui ministro de la Diáspora haitiana y me da ideas de cómo hacerlo en Montreal, en Miami, en Nueva York. También yo quiero saludar la memoria del apóstol de la independencia cubana, José Martí, que murió con pasaporte haitiano. Bueno, Haiti's political crisis is an immigration crisis, a nuisance for the region, and a governance one for the Haitians. It is structural and must be analyzed as a process of deconstruction of the Haitian neo-colonial state, rebuilt by the US occupation and impoverished by the French ransom of independence. It is a repressive state whose mission was to control the peasants through a gendarmerie overseeing the rural areas with the section chiefs supported by the military district officers, and the Duvalier added a militia of 300,000 Tontomacoute bogeymen to that repressive apparatus. From 1804 to 1986, the majority of the population had been terrorized by dictators, autocrats, governing for a small educated black and mulatto elite who concentrated the economic power with foreign merchants, mainly French and Germans, who controlled the banking system. At the turn of the 20th century, the Syro-Lebanese arrived and gradually became part of that elite. For the US government, the Monroe Doctrine implied an intervention as the most effective strategy for state building, because in its point of view, Haiti could not recover from the failures of government without US external interference to help create a new bureaucracy. During the US occupation, the US government and investors did a special division of production. They created sugarcane plantations and mills in Cuba and the Dominican Republic and organized the migration of Haitian labor to these plantations. This is why we still have 500,000 of Haitian descendants in Cuba and 1 million in Dominican Republic. But this intervention encouraged a sense of national identity and to population organized to end the 19 years occupation, first through armed guerrilla and later through strikes and civil disobedience actions. Between 1962 and 68, François Duvalier opened the gates for the first migration to supply Haitian teachers, doctors, intellectuals, and technicians during the decolonization of French Africa and the Révolution tranquille in Quebec, Canada. Because of this human rights abuse and his dictatorship, Haiti was not part of the Alliance for Progress program for Latin America. When he died, the US supported his son Jean-Claude as the new president for life and promoted Haiti as the Taiwan of the Caribbean. Investments were made in the industrial park in Port-au-Prince, which attracted workers from the countryside. But Duvalier's son, Baby Doc, initiated a second wave of migration. His repressive policies incited the peasants, the political activists, and a major part of the middle class to emigrate to the Bahamas, Miami, New York, Montreal, and the French Overseas Department. During the last decade, the third wave of migration went to Chile, Brazil, and again to the US and the DR. Now, approximately 2 to 3 million Haitians live abroad. Maybe half of them do so illegally. According to the World Bank, more than 64% of Haitians live in cities, and more than 80% of all the Haitian university graduates, intellectual, professional, artists, live abroad. The absence of that middle class and the accelerated urbanization, meaning massive arrival of peasants to the unprepared city structures, is a big obstacle to economic development and the practice of democracy. There is no buffer between the have and the have-not. The newcomers have deforested their mountainous land or have sold it to come to the city. They squatted lands not suited for housing and created immense slums called ghettos and uncontrollable by the small police force. Once organized into neighborhood watch group, now they have become gang control territory for rapes, kidnappings, the smuggling of arms, ammunition, and drugs. From 86 to 2021, the repressive police and predator state have reached their expiration date. During that period, the donor country's strategy was to bypass the state and to finance PVOs and NGOs, depleting the government of its professional cadres and technicians. The weakening of the state public administration, the brain drain, and some measures of structural adjustments ruined the agricultural sector even further and accelerated the urbanization process and the dependency on the US and the DR for migrations. In 1990, Jean-Bertrand Aristide's election gave hope to the majority of the population that change had arrived. But his government was crushed 7 months later by the military, which established a paramilitary gang called FRAP, supported by the US to repress the popular movement. 3 years later, Aristide was reestablished in power. In 2004, the US intervened again, ousting Aristide for 7 years in South Africa. Meanwhile, the UN deployed a peace-building mission with a military force of deterrence in all the regions of Haiti to stabilize the country. Under the MINUSTAH, the mission of the United Nations for Haiti's stabilization, President Préval and Martelly were able to complete their mandates. There was a massive and therefore unparalleled corruption of the Martelly-Lamotte years, during which a good 1.5 to 2 billion of the approximately 3 billion of the Petro-Caribe loans were stolen. So the slogan is Code Cob Petro-Caribe in every mouth. But still the taxpayers of this already poor country will be called upon to repay over the next 20 years. Nor has been any focused reporting on the dismantlement by Jovenel Moïse of almost all the public institutions of this country, courts, electoral council, parliament, police, as a result of which his assassination has left us with this shell of state. The short-lived special envoy, Daniel Foote, made clear in his letter of resignation, then in his testimony before representative mixed foreign relations committees, that the US government imposed Martelly as president, turned a blind eye to the aberrations of his governance and to the corruption, and finally to not allow a single election, local, parliamentary, or presidential, to take place during his 5-year terms, despite the near total control by his party of both houses of parliament. So no excuses allowed regarding passage of election laws. Well, as the sign in the porcelain shop says, if you break it, you pay for it. The context has been marked during the last 3 years by violent political unrest and high crime. Clashes between armed groups have claimed the lives of hundreds of people and displaced thousands of residents in the capital. For lack of sufficient resources, the Haitian National Police is inefficient. The deterioration of the country's economic condition, inflation at 20%, and depreciation of the national good, as well as political unrest, have strongly affected food security in Haiti, a country highly exposed to natural disasters. The UN estimates that nearly a third of the population is in need of emergency food assistance in 2021. Since 2020, the political parties have been meeting to reach an agreement to replace Moïse on the end of his constitutional mandate, which would be on 7th of February on 2021. At that time, a group of civil society initiated a citizen movement to put pressure for change and contacted the political parties and all the organized sectors of the population to assume their responsibilities, to put aside their differences and engage in constructive dialogue to allow the election to be held in a peaceful atmosphere. On August 30th, at the Montana Hotel in Port-au-Prince, an agreement between civil society and the political and popular organizations was signed. This political accord is a process to find a Haitian solution. Haitian because initiated, conceived, supported, defended by Haitians within a democratic and ethical framework. In the absence of a legal, constitutional response to resolve the crisis of political power, the Montana Accord provides a moral and ethical legitimacy to equip the nation with leaders capable of creating the necessary climate for the holding of real elections. There is a vibrant civil society and progressive and democratic parties who have come together and who continue to convince people into dialogue. This Haiti, which wants to treat and cure its ills in order to progress irreversibly toward a well-being, towards better living together. And for that, yes, we need the support of the hemispheric authorities to set up a real transitional government whose roadmap limits the powers constrained by the agreement and the Constitution of 1987, and which will lay the foundation for the transformations necessary for the regeneration of our country. And it bears repeating with Eduardo Galeano until the death period, Haiti is the founding country of Latin American independence and the first in the world to outlaw slavery. It deserves much more than the notoriety due to disgrace. But the crisis will not be resolved if we don't find a common interest with the international community and mainly the US and the DR. In the first half of the 21st century, our common objective is to fix the Haitians in Haiti. This can necessitate a new deal or even a new Marshall Plan for Haiti, a plan that will build a green Haiti and mitigate the climate changes and promote nearshoring manufacturing facilities. A plan that will include the best brains of the diaspora. It would improve the lives of many now fleeing by establishing security and functioning government institutions, and could finally pave the way for the long-term political and social stability that has eluded the country for decades. Lastly, according to the United Nations, deaths linked to what is called extreme weather will continue to grow, as will the waves of migration that climate change is triggering. These deaths will also continue to grow. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime already indicated a couple of weeks ago that 80% of the world's population is hostage to organized gangs of diverse origin and destructive level. The metastasis of crime and the vulnerability of a growing population, accelerated by climatic change, undermine the Haitian government ability to control its territory and protect its inhabitants. This may provoke the collapse of the Haitian state before the middle of the century. Haiti cannot stop population exodus or control the growth of criminal activities in the country. Haitian citizens have lost confidence in the state's ability to protect them. This dissolution will affect directly the United States, the Dominican Republic, the Latin American and the Caribbean countries, and the French overseas departments. The challenges facing Haiti are immense and cannot be easily met without active coordination of international policies, leadership of American diplomacy, and close and sustained interaction with the main Haitian actors. Thank you very much.